Hello, and welcome to the LIVECAST podcast, the one true chapter by chapter podcast going through A Song of Ice and Fire one chapter a week. I am your host, Jeff, better as Bread and Beefish.
And I'm your other host, Emmett, better known as Poor Quentin.
And welcome to the 149th episode of the LIVECAST titled Keep Your Sword Sharp, an analysis of A Clash of Kings Jon 8, in which Qhorin Halfhand makes his last stand, but not before laying a heavy task on our very sad boy, Jonny Snow.
I feel like you could say that about all of Jon's father figures, but not before laying a heavy task. That's what they all do on their way to the door. Oh, by the way, Jon, here's something that will cripple you emotionally for the next 6 to 8 months. Bye. And now it's Qhorin's turn.
Qhorin's turn next, and then we get Mance Rayder and Tormund Giantsbane, Stannis Baratheon. Everyone's like, "Hey, Jon, you gotta come."
Maester Aemon. It just keeps happening
over and over and over again for Jon. It's like a theme that George R. R. Martin likes to do in A Song of Ice and Fire.
You don't say.
He certainly does. So, as always, this episode is brought to you by our not a small council, our Hand of the King Wolfman Zach, Grand Maester Timbob, troubleshooter of systems and designer of circuit boards, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Mark N., Sir Keith J., Master of Whisperers, Lord Philip the Merciful, Master of Laws, Archmaester June, Healer of the Lesser Poxes, Ragged Michael, War of the North, Nelson the Hammer, Prince of Dragonscombe, Scarlet the Other Woman, and Mistress of Whisperers, Lord Micah, the Quilt Lion, War of the West, Herald the Golden Tooth, Master of the Banefort, and the Kraken's Bane, Lord James, the Gem that was promised, Lord Jake, assistant to the Hand of the King, Lady Zena of Lyrium, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dane, and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club, His Grace's High Inquisitor, Sir Frank B., Lawrence, Prince of Dorne, Kelly, Ward of the Eastern Bishops of Old Bay of Crabs, Stephen the Steadfast, Master of Hounds, the Blue Winter Rose, Knight of Highgarden, Lady Stephanie, Lord Carlos, Lord Andrew the Restless, a priest to the drowned god, Sir Sorcedelica, Sugar Tit Stent, the Troglodyte Warrior, Queer Alex, Beyonce's favorite stand, Ambassador Chromatica, Rainbow Commander, the Ladies, and Gentle Dems, Haldover, the Way for T-Well, A.A. Ron, Dampere, Prophet of the Forsaken, and High Priest of Euron Crowseye, Lieutenant Glenn, Lord of H-Town, Daenerys of House Colgarian, the First of Her Name, Princess of Dragonstone, Mistress of Art, the Overworked, Queen of the Pencils, the Eraser in the First Draft, Queen of Monochrome, Devotee the Great, Game of Thrones, Portraits of the Realm, Lady Realist of Seven Kingdoms, Blender Paints, Maker of Drawings, and the Michelangelo of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Lord Adam T., Lady Alexander of Tarth, Sir Christoph Logus, Bloody Scorpion of the Redfield, Defender of the Litter of Kin, and the Wolverine of House Crogoyle, Lady Elizabeth, Mistress of Horse, Space, Lesbians, Sir Josh Snow, Bastard Bounty Hunter of the North, Surveyor, Chief of Parties of the Frozen Wastes, Lord Peter, the Dead Shepherd Reborn, Preacher of the Poor Fellows, Marshal Harrison, absent shipwrecked in the Jade Sea, Grave Rob Stark of the Cadaver King, and Horror of Harrenhal, Ola, proponent of establishing a feudal, pseudo-democratic system of great councils where every count votes, Sir Tim, the Knight who is guided by voices, Lord Nick, Thucydides, Lord of Plagues, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dane, and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club, Part 2, Lady Anna, the Lovely Castellan, Pat Ironwood, the Blood Broil, and Guardian of the Bone Way, Lord Charles Tyrell of Highgarden, Lord Paramount of the Mander, Defender of the Marches, High Marshal of the Reach, War of the South, and the Heir of House Tyrell, Luke, Lord of Lone Leaf and the Pillar of Autumn, Master of Zorse, Joe Snow, King of the Metro and Protector of the Tri-State, Squire Matt S., Future Matt S., the one who will bring balance to the kingdoms, B-Word, Queen Beyond the Wall, Lord Kyle, Lord Samu Seaworth, Sir Max, Lord Commander of the Constitutional Guard, Blackberry the Bold, Champion of Feel Good Times, Lady Ivory Dane, aspiring noble author in the Seven Kingdoms, Lady of Starfall, Warness of the South, and patron of free-wheeling bisexuals, Lady Jamisa, she who suggests that coconuts migrate, Lord Christoph of Arendelle, official ice master, deliverer of the valiant, pungent reindeer king, keeper of feisty pants, and prince consort to his ginger sweet love queen, Anna, Lord Sir Septon Brothers, and I forgot to put in the notes, but Lord Travis has returned from abroad from his voyages far and wide abroad. So welcome back, Lord Travis, Master of Ships, War of the Waves, and the Kraken's Bane. Welcome back, Travis.
Thank you so much, Lord Counselors, as always. And yeah, special welcome back to Travis, one of our favorite people. We love you, buddy.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. We're so glad to see you back, and so glad to see you getting back in action as well in all things A Song of Ice and Fire and fandom. Our spoiler warning is to say in every episode we'll potentially be talking about all published books. That is the 5 novels, 3 Dunking novellas, histories, interviews, the Windsor sample chapters, as well as Game of Thrones TV show. Anything and everything.
Our question this week comes from Red Relu himself, a High Lord patron, who asks, who is the anyway, here's Wonderwall of the A Song of Ice and Fire world? So, for those unfamiliar, just in case you're born under a rock or 80 years old, Wonderwall is the popular song by the English band Oasis. That's very easy to mock for its kind of cliched, textbook guitar nature, and so it's an easy meme to make fun of anyone who's like going to pull out an acoustic guitar at an inappropriate time and go, anyway, here's Wonderwall, to, to distract or to make yourself the center of attention, or just as a non sequitur. That's just kind of the meme. So, Jeff, who would do that in a Song of Ice and Fire world?
There's two figures that easily come to mind. The first is the obvious one, which is Rhaegar Targaryen, right? He's the guy who says, anyways, here's Summerhall, as he plays, because he plays them.
Yes.
What's he plays Jenny's song, right? Or is that the song that he plays, or he hears that from as he's rolling around Westeros,
right.
or one of those types of songs. I can't remember.
He's like, me play a song. I never pulls out immense harp covered in gemstones. And it's just like, I didn't think I'd be asked to play. But yeah, no, Rhaegar, excellent choice. Who's your other one?
The second one is my favorite little asshole in A Song of Ice and Fire, which is Marillion. He's actually not my favorite at all, because he's such a terrible person. But he's just like we can talk about a character later in this episode who's just like a petty asshole. But like that's like Marillion, but he's like the guy who like learned how to play music just to pick up girls, and I don't know anyone like that at all.
Certainly not.
No, not. I don't know who that could be, but fuck. But I think Marillion has the distinction of being really petty, cowardly, and rapey, which is all the makes for a relatively terrible concoction of a character. So he would definitely be the anyway here's Wonderwall of the Song of Ice and Fire world. Like I have to imagine like some of these guys who are these bards. And we did talk about this at one of our earlier episodes. Like George seems to have it out for like the bardic class in fantasy, right? Like he just like really wants these guys.
He likes making fun of them a bit, for sure.
Making fun of them, or in the case of Marillion, like having them go through immense amounts of torture and pain before he's maybe killed. No one's really sure.
Or Simon Silvertongue. Yep,
Simon Silvertongue
true.
Baked into made into a bowl of brown. So. Yeah, there's lots of these characters who are like the anyway here's Wonderwall of the Song of Ice and Fire world. But I pointed out one Rhaegar who's a little bit more neutral, Marillion who's a little shitty and awful and terrible. But there's probably at least one that's a good one, right?
Rhaegar is the obvious one. Like there's that bit in Animal House where a guy's strumming a guitar and John Belushi just walks up to him and grabs the guitar and just smashes it. And that's Robert vis-a-vis Rhaegar. Robert is just John Belushi smashing Rhaegar's guitar repeatedly. Thinking like outside the bard characters.
I was trying to set you up for Mance.
Sure, but I was like, the bard characters are obvious. Like that, they all literally do that. Salador San, I bet would pull this kind of shit. I bet he would start playing music. I don't know if it would probably be more offensive and elaborate than Wonderwall, but I bet he would be interrupting people with music all the time. All those Old Town assholes. I bet Lazy Leo would interrupt people with like horrible renderings of probably like bad Nirvana covers that he would do. Or he would like mess up the chords to Everlong, even though no one should be able to mess up the chords to Everlong. He would repeatedly get that done. D.
Yeah. No,
exactly.
Lazy Leo would definitely be that guy, and we'd all have to cheer for him anyways at the end of it, right? That'd be the type of guy.
I suppose so. I suppose he would make us. He would make us. Otherwise, his family would kill us. That's just how Lazy Leo rolls. So thank you, Red Relu, for the question. If you'd like to ask us questions we answer here on the NCAA podcast, you are welcome to become a Sworn Sword or higher level patron over at patreon.com/NCAAcast ASOIAF, where you can get show notes, free merch, access to the Ncaa Slack at our 2 highest tiers, and bonus episodes.
Yes, and our next Patreon bonus episode, which will be coming in a few weeks' time from when we're recording this episode, is going to be a wrap-up of all things A Clash of Kings, in which we attempt to talk about A Clash of Kings theories, stuff in A Clash of Kings that tells us about the endgame of Song of Ice and Fire, and then talk about what we're excited about to cover in A Storm of Swords. So if you guys remember who are our patrons, we did this for a Game of Thrones, in which we talked about all the stuff we were excited for A Clash of Kings. So if you are a patron, you can go back to like late or like early 2019, and take a look at that, all the stuff we're excited for, and then compare notes to see what we actually ended up talking a lot about when we got to A Clash of Kings. So yes, it's going to be a lot of fun. But enough about Patreon. When we last checked in with John, he and Qhorin Halfhand were running for their lives as the wildlings blew hunting horns as they pursued them. Let's see if maybe one of them can make it out alive in this synopsis of A Clash of Kings, John 8. When Qhorin Halfhand told him to find some brush for a fire, Jon knew their end was near. It'll be good to feel warm again, if only for a little while, Jon told himself while he hacked bare branches from the trunk of a dead tree. Ghost sat on his haunches, watching, silent as ever. Will he howl for me when I'm dead, as Bran's wolf howled when he fell, Jon wondered. Will Shaggy Dog howl far off in Winterfell, and Grey Wind and Nymeria, wherever they might be? I don't know. I mean, sometimes I have to stop myself and remember that Jon is a mere 16 years old, and now he's getting his mind around the fact that he's about to die. I, for one, did not realize I was mortal until I was about 26 years old, so Jon has me by a good 10 years. The moon rises as the sun sinks as Jon gets a fire going. Qhorin Halfhand stands over Jon and comments about how a fire can be as beautiful as a maid on her wedding day. This surprises Jon, who thinks Qhorin wouldn't talk of maids and wedding nights. Did Qhorin love a maid once or get married? Well, Jon couldn't ask that now. So instead, he spreads his hands over the fire and lets the fire warm his fingers as Qhorin sits cross-legged near the fire. There were only two of them left in the Frost Fangs. In flashback, we learn what happened. Jon had hoped that Dalbridge would hold the wildlings of the pass, but then they heard the horn, and they knew that Dalbridge was dead. And then the eagle showed up overhead. Stone Snake had aimed his bow, but the bird had flown off as Eben muttered about wargs and skin changers as Jon just stood there being like, yeah, fuck those wargs and skin changers. I hate them too. They glimpsed the eagle twice more the day after and heard the hunting horn behind them echoing against the mountains. Each time it seemed a little louder, a little closer. When night fell, the Halfhand told Eben to take the squire's garron as well as his own and ride east for Mormont with all haste, back the way they had come. The rest of them would draw off the pursuit. Send Jon, Eben had urged. He could ride as fast as me. Jon has a different part to play, Qhorin said. He is half a boy still. No, said Qhorin. He is a man of the Night's Watch. Eben leaves as the moon rises, and Stone Snake went east before doubling back southwest to hide the trail. The days and nights then begin to blur as the Night's Watchmen sleep in their saddle and only stop to feed and water their horses before riding again. The three rangers move through woods, ridges, traverse rivers, and attempt to cover their tracks, but the eagle always keeps watch over them. So in the end, it was useless. A Shadowcat had shown up when they were scaling a ridge, and Stone Snake's mare went into a panic and ran before breaking its leg. They did eat the horse that night, and Ghost ate really, really well, too. Sounds not so tasty. Qhorin made a porridge with the horse's blood, which tasted awful, but Jon shoved it down his throat anyways. There was no question of riding double. Stone Snake offered to lay in wait for the pursuit and surprise them when they came. Perhaps he could take a few of them with him down to hell. Qhorin refused. If any man in the Night's Watch can make it through the Frost Fangs alone and afoot, it is you, brother. You can go over the mountains that a horse must go around. Make for the fist. Tell Mormont what Jon saw and how. Tell him that the old powers are waking, that he faces giants and wargs and worse. Tell him that the trees have eyes again. He has no chance, Jon thought when he watched Stone Snake vanish over a snow-covered ridge, a tiny black bug crawling across a rippling expanse of white. Each successive night grew colder, but Ghost stayed nearby. Jon could sense that, and Ghost provided company that Qhorin could not. Even dreams don't keep Jon company up here. He has none, at least for the moment. Back to the present, Qhorin asks if Jon's sword is sharp. Yes, it is. It is Valyrian steel. Has anyone ever mentioned that Jon Snow's sword is Valyrian steel? Fucking everyone. Qhorin then asks if Jon remembers his vows. He does. So Qhorin asks that they say their words together, and Jon agrees. Their voices blended as one beneath the rising moon while Ghost listened and the mountains themselves bore witness. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die in my post. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms of men. I pledge my life and honor to the Night's Watch for this night and all the nights to come. But then there were no more words after that. Jon opens and closes his burnt fingers, has he ever done that before? Praying that the old gods would give him strength when he dies bravely. He figures that he would be dead in a day, or maybe two at most. The flames were burning low by then, the warmth fading. The fire will go out. The fire will soon go out, Qhorin said, but if the wall should ever fall, all the fires will go out. There was nothing Jon could say to that. He nodded. We may escape them yet, the ranger said, or not. I'm not afraid to die. It was only half lie. It may not be so easy as that, Jon. Jon did not understand. What do you mean? If we are taken, you must yield. Aghast, Jon says that Mance only spares oathbreakers like Mance Rayder himself. Qhorin says they'll spare Jon, but Jon absolutely does not want to do that. Fuck that. Qhorin is commanding Jon to yield, though. Still upset, Jon tries to protest, but Qhorin cuts him off. Our honor means no more than our lives, so long as the realm is safe. Are you a man of the Night's Watch? Yes, but there is no but, Jon Snow. You are, or you are not. Jon sat up straight. I am. Then hear me. If we are taken, you will go over to them as the wildling girl you captured once urged you. You may demand that they may demand that you cut your cloak to ribbons, that you swear them an oath on your father's grave, that you curse your brothers and your lord commander. You must not balk. Whatever is asked of you, do as they bid you. But in your heart, remember who you are and what you are. Ride with them, eat with them, fight with them for as long as it takes, and watch. What exactly is Jon supposed to watch for? As for that, Qhorin doesn't know. Ghost saw the wildlings digging in the valley by the milk water. Jon needs to find out what the wildlings were after. That's Jon's new duty. Reluctantly, Jon agrees, but Jon begs Qhorin to tell Jeor Mormont that Jon never truly broke his vow. Qhorin Halfhand gazed at him across the fire, his eyes lost in pools of shadow. When I see him next, I swear it. He gestured at the fire. More wood. I want it bright and hot. Jon goes to cut some more branches, somehow unaware that Qhorin is trying to tell Jon that he's just about to die. The fire sparks hot again, but then Qhorin tells him that it's time to ride or die, or ride and die. One of the two. And where are they going? They're doubling back. Qhorin is hoping the fire draws their eyes past them. Jon's grateful for Qhorin's idea, as he very definitely does not want to turn cloak. They move cautiously, retracing their steps, moving up to a stream. They skirt around it, hugging the cliff sides. They pick their way past fallen rock up towards a waterfall as the air fills with mist. They enter into the waterfall, but Jon realizes that there's no way out. They get behind the waterfall, drenching themselves in the process. And Jon realizes that Qhorin knew this place was here. Qhorin confirms as much, having learned about the natural hideout when he was Jon's age from another older ranger. Qhorin seats himself and draws the sword as Jon takes off his wet cloak and lays it down by the fire. Sleep came at last, and with it nightmares. He dreamed of burning castles and dead men rising unquiet from their graves. It was still dark when Qhorin woke him. While the half-hand slept, Jon sat with his back to the cave wall, listening to the water and waiting for the dawn. The next day, Qhorin and Jon eat some horse meat and saddle on up. They emerge from the cave, hopeful that they won't be spotted. But immediately they see the eagle perched up on the tree. Ghost gives chase, but the bird flaps away. Qhorin's mouth hardens and he turns to Jon. Here is as good as a place as any to make a stand, he declared. The mouth of the cave shelters us from above, and it cannot get behind us without passing through the mountain. Is your sword sharp, Jon Snow? Yes, he said. We'll feed the horses. They've served us bravely, poor beasts. Jon gives his horse some oats and pulls his gloves tight to his hands, reminding himself that he is the shield that guards the realms of men. A hunting horn echoes around them, and Qhorin says the wildlings are going to be here soon and to keep Ghost close. Jon sees the wildlings coming over a ridge a half-mile away as Ghost does his silent snarl bit while Jon attempts to reassure him. The hunters approached warily, perhaps fearing arrows. Jon counted 14 with 8 dogs. Their large, round shields were made of skins stretched over woven wicker and painted with skulls. Around half of them hid their faces behind crude helms of wood and boiled leather. On either wing, archers knot shafts to the strings of small wood and horn bows, but did not loose. The rest seemed to be armed with spears and mauls. One had a chipped stone axe. They wore only what bits of armor they had looted from dead rangers or stolen during raids. Wildlings did not mine or smelt, and there were few smiths and fewer forges north of the wall. Qhorin drew his long sword. The tale of how he had taught himself to fight with his left hand after losing half of his right was part of his legend. It was said that he handled a blade better now than ever before. Jon stood shoulder to shoulder with the big ranger and pulled Long Claw from its sheath. Despite the chill in the air, sweat stung his eyes. The wildling stopped 10 yards below the cave mouth, and a dude dressed in all sorts of animal, giant, and human bones approaches. Qhorin addresses him. Rattleshirt, Qhorin called down, icy polite. To the crows, I be the Lord of Bones. The rider's helm was made from the broken skull of a giant, and all up and down his arms, bear claws had been sewn to his boiled leather. Qhorin snorted. I see no lord, only a dog dressed in chicken bones who rattles when he rides. Owned! Rattleshirt hisses and his horse rears up, rattling the dude. Rattleshirt declares he's going to add Qhorin's bones to his armor after he boils off his flesh and uses his skull as an oatmeal bowl. Qhorin challenges Rattleshirt to attack then, but he's not taking the bait. Sure, the wildlings have them outnumbered something like 14-2, 7-1, and the wildlings have 8 dogs. Jon and Qhorin can fight or run, but they're toast either way. Show them, commanded Rattleshirt. The woman reached into a blood-stained sack and drew out a trophy. Eben had been bald as an egg, so she dangled the head by an ear. He died brave, she said. But he died, said Rattleshirt. Same like you. He freed his battle axe, brandishing it above his head. Good steel it was, with a wicked gleam to both blades. Eben was never a man to neglect his weapons. The other wildlings crowded forward beside himself, yelling taunts. A few chose Jon for their mockery. Is that your wolf boy? The skinny youth called, unlimbering a stone flail. You'll be my cloak before the sun is down. On the other side of the line, another spearwife opened her ragged furs to show Jon a heavy white breast. Does the baby want his mama? Come have a suck of this, boy. The dogs are barking too. They would shame us into folly. Qhorin gave Jon a long look. Remember your orders. Sorry. Jon's face. Rattleshirt orders archers forward, but then Jon tells them to stop. He's yielding. They warned me bastard blood was craven, he heard Qhorin Halfhand say coldly behind him. I see it as so. Run to your new masters, coward. Jon's face goes red as he descends to join Rattleshirt, who says they don't like cravens. They don't want him either. But then as an archer pulls off her sheepskin helmet, revealing herself to be Ygritte, she says he's not craven. He's the bastard of Winterfell. But Rattleshirt just wants Jon to die, and he doesn't trust them. On a rock above them, the eagle flapped its wings and split the air with a scream of fury. The bird hates you, Jon Snow, said Ygritte. And well as he might, he was a man before you killed him. I did not know, said Jon truthfully, trying to remember the face of the man he had slain in the past. You told me Mance would take me. And he will, Ygritte said. But Rattleshirt still wants Jon dead. He orders Ragwild to kill him, but the spearwife tells Rattleshirt that Jon should prove his new allegiance. I'll do whatever you ask. The words came hard, but Jon said them. Rattleshirt's bone upper clouded loudly as he laughed. Then kill the half-hand bastard. As if he could, said Qhorin. Turn, Snow, and die. Qhorin's sword comes for Jon, and Longclaw is suddenly in Jon's hands. The swords meet as Jon fights back against Qhorin, but Jon is easily outmatched by Qhorin as he slows and starts weakening under the force of sword cuts from Qhorin Halfhand. But then Ghost bites Qhorin's calf, and Jon plants his foot and swings his sword. The ranger was leaning away, and for an instant, it seemed that Jon's slash had not touched him. Then a string of red tears appeared across the big man's throat, bright as a ruby necklace, and the blood gushed out of him, and Qhorin Halfhand fell. Ghost's muzzle was dripping red, but only the point of the bastard's blade was stained, the last half-inch. Jon pulled the direwolf away and knelt with one arm around him. The light was already fading in Qhorin's eyes. Sharp, he said, lifting his main fingers. Then his hand fell, and he was gone. He knew, he thought numbly. He knew what they would ask me. He thought of Samuel Tarly then, of Gren and Dolorous Ed, Pip and Toad back at Castle Black. Had he lost them all as he had lost Bran and Rickon and Robb? Who was he now? What was he? Jon is dragged to his feet by the wildlings. They ask who he is, but Ygritte answers, he's Jon Snow of Winterfell, Ned Stark's blood. None of that matters to Rattleshirt, who still wants Jon dead. But Ygritte says that Jon yielded. Another wildling says, Another wildling says Jon killed Qhorin Halfhand too. Nope, that was ghost work according to Rattleshirt. And Rattleshirt is very definitely upset that Jon killed Qhorin when Qhorin was Rattleshirt's kill. Ragwell mocks Rattleshirt for not seeming all that eager to kill Qhorin, but Rattleshirt changes topics and says he doesn't like Jon because he's a warg and a crow. But Ygritte says they're not scared of wargs. Everyone else besides Rattleshirt agrees, and Rattleshirt reluctantly yields. They burned Qhorin Halfhand where he'd fallen, on a pyre made of pine needles, brush, and broken branches. Some of the wood was still green, and it burned slow and smoky, sending a black plume up into the bright, hard blue of the sky. Afterward, Rattleshirt claimed some charred bones, while the others threw dice for the ranger's gear. Ygritte won his cloak. Will we return by the Skirling Pass? Jon asked her. He did not know if he could face those heights again, or if his Garen could survive a second crossing. No, she said. There's nothing behind us. The look she gave him was sad. By now, Mance is down the Milkwater, marching on your wall. And that is the synopsis for A Clash of Kings, Jon 8. Kind of a moody chapter, which is another way of saying it's a Jon Snow chapter. What did you think, sir?
Killer voice acting as always, sir. I think you missed your calling more and more with each chapter.
I just sorry for cracking up so much during the synopsis. I just, for whatever reason, I got the giggles in the middle of it.
I can't blame you. Your rattle shirt had me giggling too. It's perfect for him. It suits that scrawny, selfish bastard. Well done, sir. Well done.
Thank you.
So the other climactic chapters of A Clash of Kings are about bloody battles, political transformations, narrow escapes from castles and cities. Not so with Jon VIII, a chapter about two men wandering the wilderness, knowing only that they are hunted. The sudden switch to minimalism is appropriate. It reflects how Jon and Qhorin are out of options. Their backs are against the wall, so to speak. It's a bleak chapter, but also bracing and galvanizing in its focus. Everything is boiled down to their decisions, their will. What do their oaths mean here at the end of the world and the end of their lives?
Yeah, and there's a kind of pattern with the conclusion of Jon's arcs in each book of the series so far. There's a question of loyalty and vows, the bionic deep currents of emotion. Jon feels really hard stuff about the decision he's facing, but he still is just about to go through with it until he's pulled back by people from carrying out what he wants. Clash follows this pattern, but unlike Jon's other arc conclusions, this one has our sad boy ordered to fake turncloak on his vows and pretend to be someone else. There's a oft-quoted line that George likes to say when people ask him why he writes, and it's William Faulkner's, "The human heart in conflict with itself is the only thing worth writing about." And this chapter is perhaps not the true starting point for Jon Snow for his human heart in conflict with itself conflict. You could trace it back to a Game of Thrones. But it's the point where his identity conflict is really shaped to bound forward in the narrative to A Storm of Swords and A Dance of Dragons and beyond.
Tyrion 15 last week found him wandering through dreams of the dead. As Jon 8 opens, our favorite bastard is also preparing to join the ranks of the fallen. Jon knew their end was near. It will be good to feel warm again, if only for a little while, he told himself. George starts the chapter with just Jon and Qhorin Halfhand, gradually filling in the gaps so we understand what happened to the other men. Structuring the chapter this way adds to the sense of doom and dread. It's as if they never had a chance. It was always going to end like this. Jon 7 ended with Squire Dalbridge making his brave last stand, sacrificing his life for his brothers and the cause of the Night's Watch. One by one, they are all forced to make the same choice. Qhorin sends Ebben to ride for the Fist of the First Men while they draw off pursuit. It doesn't work. The wildlings hunt him down and kill him. He died brave, the wildlings say, but he died all the same. And that's the reality they're facing. They're up against not only their pursuers, but their harsh environment. Their enemies kill Ebben. Stone Snake is taken out of the group by nothing more than a chance encounter with a starving shadow cat that spooks his horse. The last time Jon sees him, Stone Snake is a black bug against an endless expanse of white, as Jon describes it, emphasizing how small and powerless these hardened veterans are now. No matter what they do, no matter how they use their skills, they are marked for death. The eagle is always watching, a black dot of destiny in the sky. Stephen Atwell wrote about how expertly George fuses sorcery with espionage scenario. The eagle is being possessed by the spirit of a dead man, but that mystical power is being used by the wildlings for a grounded military purpose, tracking the Watchmen. George has said he doesn't like how often magic in fantasy functions as a lazy way to erase the playing field. It's more interesting when magic is embedded into the playing field as one of many tools to use. A Clash of Kings is about both political and magical expansions, and these Watchmen are on the knife's edge between those worlds.
Yeah, and you kind of wonder whether this is the first time they've ever encountered like a warg or a skin changer, but you have to imagine they probably have in the past, since they are easily able to identify that Jon himself is a skin changer and a warg in Jon's 7th chapter. So they know the danger that they're up against, and they know how precarious their situation is, and they are facing it bravely all the same. It's interesting, though, that Qhorin Halfhand doesn't command Jon to use magic to skin change Ghost and scout ahead or fight the wildling pursuit party or disrupt the pursuit in any way. As we talked about in Jon 7, Qhorin is aware that Jon is a warg and a skin changer, so why not use the same magic that Orell is using to aid in their flight away from the wildlings? Well, I think obviously the first part of it is that Qhorin is a man of the Night's Watch and uses tools he's comfortable with, ranging, scouting, fighting, etc., the basic tools of a Night's Watchman. Qhorin also wouldn't know how to educate Jon in using his wolf. He would be like, okay, Jon, here are the steps you need to take in order to control Ghost to kind of lead the pursuers in an opposite direction or fight them off or whatnot. The second part, which is more important in my mind, is that Qhorin Halfhand and George R. R. Martin are training Jon on how to be a ranger. Like you were saying, magic isn't a cheat code to get through a difficult level of the game in A Song of Ice and Fire. And to kind of stay in the video game metaphor, Jon can't level up until he does the hard thing. Running, sleeping in his saddle, building fires, trying to stay alive in this vast and frozen expanse. Now, recently, I had the chance to talk with Radio Westeros about young Grift, and I talked about how everyone props his kid up to be absolutely amazing because how well he's been trained and he's a prepared prince. However, all of that training, in my estimation, has been within a safe classroom environment with no real danger associated with it. That's not the case with Jon. Jon's training as a ranger, the leadership lessons he learns from Qhorin have to be earned the hard way. The overall problem is that Jon doesn't have a magical mentor figure the same way that Bran has, the Three-Eyed Crow, and Jojen Reed. So in the long term, Jon is getting his training in the practical ways to survive in the wilderness and the basics of leadership and ranging. But he isn't getting training on utilizing his warging abilities, and that will signal some problems down the road, especially that one time where Ghost is going nuts because he knows that that Jon's about to be assassinated. Still, all that being said, Qhorin Halfhand is providing valuable mentorship to Jon Snow here.
It's that tough relationship with control that I think mentors have, because you did a great job with Radio Westeros talking about Team Grift. And part of the problem there is they have such control over their perfect prince and such influence over him that he really hasn't faced any danger because he knows it's always a charade. Whereas the flip side here is that Qhorin is giving Jon real valuable practical experience, but that means he has no control over it, so that means it can all go wrong. And that's the reality that young Grift has never had to face that Jon has to deal with here. And yeah, Qhorin is doing his best to train Jon and to keep the mission alive. That duality of both magic and politics is reflected in his leadership. The warning Qhorin sends with Stone Snake isn't about the wildling threat so much as the old powers. Tell Mormont that he faces giants and wargs and worse. Tell him the trees have eyes again. Along the same lines, the duty he lays on Jon isn't to kill Mance, nor disrupt his political plans. It's to learn if Mance found the magic to break the wall he was looking for up here in the mountains. This is the emergence of the complex dynamic that will dominate Jon's story in A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons. In the face of the others, the war between the Watch and the Wildlings is absurd, a mutual suicide pact. The wise on both sides know it. Qhorin knows it here, and Mance and Dalla know it in A Storm of Swords. As Mance tells Jon, "If I sound the horn of winter, the wall will fall." Or so the songs would have me believe. There are those among my people who want nothing more, but once the wall is fallen, Dalla said, what will stop the others? That right there is the wisdom that could bring two people together. But that wisdom alone is not enough to wipe the slate clean. There are still long-standing grudges. There are still cultural gaps to cross. There are still individual crises that could spin out of control and doom both sides. Again, George wants magic to enhance the drama of his storytelling rather than reduce it. Here, rather than disrupting the elemental thrill of the chase, magic adds an extra layer of gravity to it. As Qhorin says, there is more at stake than just their own little fire, their own little lives. If the wall should ever fall, all the fires and lives go out. And that's not because of Mance. That's because of the White Walkers. It can be hard to remember the big picture because of how intimately this chapter is written. Nothing but the scraping of the hooves and the whistling of the wind, just the sun setting behind one peak and the moon rising above another, day after day. It feels like the last act of a Western when the bloody bill is about to come due. Qhorin is so silent, he may as well already be dead. Jon thinks back to his other pack, his other family, the Starks of Winterfell. He has been sundered from them, just like his fellow watchmen who have died one by one. Will the wolves howl for me, he wonders, wherever they are? What will my life have meant if I die out here so far from home? Even dreams cannot live up here, Jon thinks. That's not true, as it turns out. Jon can have dreams up here. Bran opened to Jon's third eye in his last chapter, so he dreams of burning castles and dead men rising unquiet from their graves, which is kind of a mashup of what's happening at King's Landing and Winterfell. But Jon can't make sense of any of that. It's kind of just an Easter egg for the reader, so it only deepens his sense of isolation. This chapter is a crucible designed to break him down, physically and psychologically.
Yeah, it really is an amazing crucible of magic and of men pursuing them, and of course of nature too, because these hard-bitten, tough men are having a difficult enough time evading the wildlings and their magical eagle. But nature has a role to play here as well. I mean, so much of this chapter reminds me of the chase scene from the movie The Last of the Mohicans, where Hawkeye and his small band of survivors from Fort Edward try to flee from the fort itself and from the ambush that was perpetrated by the Mohawks, led by Magua, and they're pursued by Magua and his band of Mohawk warriors. Hell, the chase scene even ends behind a waterfall. I see you, George. You like movies too. I like movies. Everyone loves movies. The parallel here is that Hawkeye and Qhorin bear some similarities. They're experts in their craft and living off the land. I mean, I remember Daniel Day-Lewis actually lived off the land in preparation for his role as Hawkeye for that movie itself. But they are also foreigners to this wilderness. The wildlings can navigate better and use their tools more effectively. But the most limiting factor, in my opinion, is nature itself. Qhorin could be the greatest ranger. Maybe he is, at least since Mance Rayder left the Night's Watch. But the Frost Fangs will slow them all down, horses will lame, and people will die. In Jon 6, Jon marveled at the beauty of this alien icy world, talking about all the majesty of crossing bridges with just sky to either side of him, shadow cats stalking their prey, and things like that. But here, that natural beauty that Jon observed back in Jon 6, that conceals the danger underneath. Now that Jon can no longer marvel at that beauty because he's running his ass off, the mountain snows, ice, and shadow cats are actually threats to Jon's life. And all of those natural threats are leading to the inevitable failure of Qhorin and Jon to shake their pursuers. Now, when we talk about George thumbing the scale in a narrative, we think of things like the Red Wedding and Ned's fall from grace. Those things kind of take center stage in our minds. But nature here is acting as one of those impediments that George is integrating to the story for Jon and Qhorin to not get away. But nature here is acting as one of the impediments for Jon and Qhorin to get away when before it was aiding Jon and company in moving deep into the Frost Fangs. Hell, it almost reads like George had nature ambush Jon here. It kind of lured Jon in with its natural beauty and its trappings and the glorious ice caps that he saw on top of the mountains. Not so much the case here, because George is clearly thumbing the scale to have Jon and Qhorin end up in that cave and for Jon to fake Turncloak and to set up his wildling arc in a storm of swords.
I love that. It's like nature was on his side on the way in, but now he wants to escape. The trap closes. It's like a Venus flytrap closing around Jon. And yeah, on reread, it's clear that Qhorin was planning on Jon turning his cloak all along, as soon as that eagle first appeared. He hints as much to Ebben, who assumes that his role, riding back to the Fist of the First Men, is the least dangerous one, and begs Qhorin to send Jon instead. It's a heroic impulse. Spare the youngest among us instead of me. Jon is still half a boy, Ebben argues. Qhorin counters that Jon is a man of the watch who, quote, has a different part to play. That's a revealing choice of words. The irony, of course, is that Ebben is the one who dies, and Jon is the one who lives. Jon spends the first chunk of this chapter girding himself up inside to die bravely like the other men. But as Qhorin tells him, it may not be so easy as that. Easy? Yeah, easy. Qhorin believes that death is not the most terrifying thing about life. A heroic death, like Jon envisions, is painful, but over quickly, and there's a simplicity to it. What Qhorin wants Jon to do instead is not so simple. Live on, as an adult, trying to reconcile his human heart in conflict with itself. As Qhorin himself said, in order to lead men, you have to know them, an echo of what Ned told his sons. Qhorin sent Ebben and Stonesnake away based on what he knew of them. He has been learning about Jon the whole time, and now he is putting what he has learned into practice. Qhorin knows that Jon is brave and takes his duty seriously, but also that he is merciful and empathetic. He saw Ygritte as his fellow person, not a foe. Such a man can convince the wildlings that he is theirs now, while also holding true to his watch vows in secret. In short, Qhorin sees Jon as his ideal spy. Jon protests because becoming a spy feels like a dishonorable move. It feels cowardly in comparison to the other watchmen who faced death honestly without flinching. Jon swore a vow. He just repeated that vow. Now he is being asked to disavow the Night's Watch and join those who killed his brothers.
I just love that scene where they say their vows one final time. It's Qhorin reminding Jon of what his actual purpose is, even as he's about to ask him to give up that vow, or at least pretend to give up that vow. He wants Jon to remember that and keep that in mind as he goes forward in his story. And in a way, Qhorin is also asking Jon to give up yet another family, one where he's actually been accepted as part of. Considering how Jon was made to sit at the squire's table during Robert's feast back in a Game of Thrones, it's clear that Jon was an outsider in the castle he grew up in, that castle, of course, being Winterfell. Now here, he's been personally selected by Qhorin Halfhand to take part in the ranging, and his skills have been put to use. He's been made to feel like an equal and appear to the best of the Night's Watch. He's special, and that's what any coming-of-age boy wants to feel. It's just special, as I talked about back in Jon 6. And now Qhorin wants Jon to give all of that up for the greater good of safeguarding the realm from Mance Rayder and the wildlings. It's almost like Jon's been soaring through the skies, thinking he's hot shit, part of a crack team of rangers here. He's elite. But Qhorin isn't so interested in burnishing Jon's legacy or making him feel like part of the team here. Now, there's certainly an aspect of what Qhorin does in empowering Jon to be a leader and all the things he says about knowing your man and things like that. But the mission supersedes the leadership training now, and the mission is calling for Jon to act dishonorably. In response, Jon is aghast because he knows what Qhorin is really asking him to do, become an outsider again with the wildlings and the Night's Watch. His entire personality was shaped by that outsider role he occupied in Winterfell, and it presses on him still. Recall the final conversation piece from A Clash of Kings, Jon 1, where Mormont asked Jon how it would feel to be a Night's Watchman while his brother got to be king. What was Jon's response to that? Be troubled and keep my vows. Now Qhorin is telling Jon he has to go beyond simply being troubled by his outsider status. He has to play it discarding his vows for the greater good.
Qhorin thinks about right and wrong differently than Jon has so far. In Qhorin's view, honor is not the overall backdrop. It's a tool for the mission like any other. If Jon is willing to surrender his life to keep others safe, he should be willing to surrender his values as well. What does it matter? Are you saying your values are more important than their lives, Jon? Qhorin has sacrificed his humanity to his duty, to his legend, and he expects the same of Jon. Qhorin tortures prisoners without hesitation, after all. This is how he got that way. But George also shows us a glimmer of the man inside the myth in this really beautifully written passage. Qhorin came and stood over him as the first flame rose up flickering from the shavings of bark and dead dry pine needles. "As shy as a maid on her wedding night," the big ranger said in a soft voice, "and near as fair. Sometimes a man forgets how pretty a fire can be." He was not a man you'd expect to speak of maids and wedding nights. So far as Jon knew, Qhorin had spent his whole life in the Watch. Did he ever love a maid or have a wedding? A fire in the darkness becomes a metaphor for the transience of love, how quickly those fires go out along with our youth. Qhorin never stops and smells the roses. His life is lived for others, not his own simple pleasures. Qhorin knows he is weaponizing Jon's youthful innocence, and he knows the cost of that. He does it anyway, because he believes to his bones that it is right for the Watchmen to sacrifice themselves for Westeros. The cloak itself is not important. Cut it to ribbons if the wildlings say so. What matters, Qhorin says, is the cause for which the cloak stands. It's an important lesson for Jon about the performance of values versus living and dying on them.
Yeah, that's definitely a great distinction to have here of the performative value of saying the vows and actually living those vows out. And these guys are definitely living their vows north of the wall here. It also struck me that that great quote you were reading about Qhorin's wistful statements about the beauty of a fire as beautiful as a maiden on her wedding night. That leads to Jon to ask no follow-up questions. It's interesting to me. That unwillingness to follow up with those in authority positions over Jon doesn't just exist here north of the Wall. In Winterfell, Jon was unable to ever ask Ned about his mother, the man Catelyn had said that Ned must have loved fiercely. But Jon couldn't broach the topic with Ned because of the awkwardness of living in Winterfell as the acknowledged bastard of Ned Stark. But you can see where Jon's backstory and upbringing leads Jon here to where he can't talk with Qhorin for fear of rocking the boat. Jon has to overcome being a wallflower, and that will unfold in slow burn style as the narrative progresses. Of course, that Qhorin hints at loving a maiden and perhaps being married in his past leads to theories about Qhorin having a secret identity, Arthur Dayne being perhaps the most popular theory out there. Now, I think the issue with those types of theories is not that George has a huge backstory in mind for Qhorin Halfhand. It's rather that George wants to allude, not hint, at Qhorin having a life before the Wall. But Qhorin probably received the same charge that Jon received from Elsie Mormont, and he took it very much to heart. Your duty is here now, the Lord Commander reminded him. Your old life ended when you took the Black. Qhorin did have a life before the Wall, but he has abandoned this in favor of a samurai-like code of dying in defense of the realm. But Qhorin knows that his life is about to end. At the end of things, Qhorin is feeling a little bit nostalgic, you have to imagine. But he's given up all of that in favor of the code, and this is something that Jon might have to resist going forward. Who Jon was as the bastard of Winterfell, as the son of Ned Stark, as having a family he cared about, Jon can't forget them on the Wall in favor of becoming a duty robot. At the same time, as we'll talk about in A Dance with Dragons, Jon leans a bit too hard towards his family at the expense of his duty in saving Arya, framing his march on Ramsay within the confines of protecting his family. My wonderment is for the future of the story is how Jon will balance family and duty come the Winds of Winter and beyond. Will he be constantly struggling with his duty to the Night's Watch and safeguarding the realms of men, or will he frame his actions going forward within his family? That's a question I think that Jon struggles with in A Dance with Dragons. I don't think it'll get a resolution in the Winds of Winter. I think it'll be something he'll always struggle with.
I agree. I totally agree. I don't think there's an easy answer for him there. And I think it's just a choice that feels like a trap. And that's the same situation that he's facing here. Having laid out what he expects of Jon if they are trapped, Qhorin does his level best to spare Jon that fate, trying one last time to escape pursuit. Qhorin draws upon both his survival skills and the institutional memory of the Night's Watch to lead Jon to a hidden cave behind a waterfall. The Halfhand represents the Watch at its most competent. His tactics give Jon hope, and the reader as well. Maybe they can still escape. But when they emerge back into the daylight, the Eagle is waiting for them. Magic has won the day. Yet Qhorin still uses his wiles to position Jon and himself in an ideal defensive spot so the wildlings can't surround them. The hunting party finally comes into view. The wildlings have the Watchmen outnumbered 7-1, but Jon takes note of their poor arms and armor. George will expand on this dynamic in A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons. The wildlings pretty much always have the advantage of numbers, but they lack the resources to resist Stannis. The source of this disparity is the Wall itself. As Qhorin said, people are made of the same stuff on either side of it. The only available means of addressing that disparity has been violence. As Davos says in A Storm of Swords, Watch policy is to execute anyone who dares trade with the wildlings, so of course raiding continues. While George's sympathy in the big picture is clearly with the wildlings and those south of the Wall who stick up for them, the drama comes from the complications that inevitably arise on an individual level. Qhorin, as Jon reminds us one last time, is a living legend, and the wildlings are not led by a living legend like Mance Rayder, or even someone likable like Tormund Giantsbane. No, the wildlings are led by Rattleshirt. And Rattleshirt is neither a terrifying berserker nor a noble guardian of the soil. He's just a petty asshole, because petty assholes are a universal constant. Maybe the universal constant. What makes life north of the Wall different isn't that there are no tin pot tyrants like Rattleshirt. It's that there is an established culture of resistance to them. When Rattleshirt wants Jon dead, just because, even after he kills Qhorin, the other wildlings stick up for him. South of the Wall, Jon would probably be dead meat. But up here, his mercy for Ygritte pays off when she speaks on his behalf. Jon has to fit into this new culture, while also following Qhorin's orders to report back to the Watch eventually. Qhorin helps Jon sell it by insulting him, saying that his bastard blood means treachery, convincing the wildlings that Jon is a genuine oathbreaker. Qhorin is probably also trying to get Jon angry, because Jon is going to need adrenaline to win the fight. As Jon thinks, Qhorin knew what the wildlings would ask of him. Qhorin gave his men's lives away, one by one, and now the Halfhand gives up his own. He is the ultimate mentor, challenging Jon to take him down and replace him at risk of his own life, barely winning the duel by using his warg skills. As Ned told Bran, the only time you can be brave is when you're afraid. Qhorin forces Jon to be afraid, and so forces him to be brave. This is why Qhorin keeps asking Jon if his sword is sharp. Qhorin wants to die a clean death as he lived, his legend intact, the last samurai. Jon, meanwhile, is once more caught between worlds, as you were saying. That's the state he's left in at the end of each of his storylines in each book. That's the question that defines Jon's story. Who are you? No, really. What family, what pack can you be a part of? At the end of book 1, he gave up his Stark family. He thinks about them in this chapter. He gave them up for the Watch. Has he lost the Watch now? Who is his new pack? It's the wildlings, of course. They drag him to his feet. Ygritte and others save his life from Rattleshirt and take Qhorin's possessions for their own. In the next book, they will take him to Mance, who is no longer behind them. As Ygritte reveals to Jon, he is marching on the wall at last. I remember reading this for the first time and getting just so viscerally excited, so pumped up. The wildling threat has been built up so much in these first 2 books. Now at last we have arrived. We're going to explore the wildling camp and meet the king beyond the wall. And yet the beginning of A Storm of Swords will remind us once more of the threat of the White Walkers beyond all that. Everything is more complicated and dangerous for Jon, as well as everyone else beyond the wall. Thankfully for us, that makes for some great storytelling.
Yes, I was so excited when I got to the end of Jon's story in A Clash of Kings. We were going to have a brand new adventure with Jon. And kind of like in that same vein of the so-called next time on A Song of Ice and Fire endings in A Clash of Kings, I do think that Jon's is the best one there. We're finally going to meet Mance Rayder, a character who had been built up since the 3rd chapter in Game of Thrones. If you remember back then, Ned told Catelyn that he may need to call the Banners to confront Mance Rayder at some point down the road. And we were going to confront a new culture and find out who the wildlings really are, stripped of all the Westerosi biases regarding them and all the stories that old Nan had told Jon. More importantly, Jon had been with the Night's Watch for so much of his story so far in A Song of Ice and Fire. Him joining up with the wildlings represents a brand new epoch in Jon's story where he has to establish himself somewhere new. And this also elevates Jon's identity crisis and struggle to greater heights. And we wonder who Jon Snow will be when he has to put aside his black cloak. The answer to that question will be revealed in full in A Storm of Swords, and boy, am I ever excited to get to Jon's story there.
Yes, as great as these last few Jon chapters in The Clash of Kings especially have been with Qhorin Halfhand, his storyline in Storm is just a non-stop roller coaster ride from the wildling camp to his romance with Ygritte, to having to leave her, to the non-stop fighting on Castle Black, to Stannis showing up, to becoming Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. It's breathless stuff, but as we've been covering in this episode, it really is all set up here. So that's just kudos to George for writing Jon Snow's story so well.
Kudos to George indeed. So switching over to foreshadowing and groundwork for this episode, Qhorin tells Jon that he'll inform Jeor Mormont that Jon never broke his vows the next time he sees them. Yeah, that's definitely foreshadowing that Jeor is going to die, and they're going to talk in Night's Watch Heaven, or I guess maybe Hell.
This is the book equivalent of that line Ned has in the show when he says, "When I come back, we'll talk about your mother, I promise." Like, very heavily underscored. This is the mentor ironically committing themselves to death moment. So much so that it doesn't even make sense that Jon is even saying this. Like, right. If Jon is having to go over to the wildlings, this is in a situation in which they're trapped. So Qhorin isn't saying he's going to go over. But I think George is just trying to get that bittersweet moment where Qhorin says, "Yes, I'll tell him, even if only in death." That's a very, very Qhorin Halfhand moment. Very
Qhorin Halfhand moment indeed. So finally, for foreshadowing groundwork, the using of a skull as a drinking bowl / oatmeal bowl that Rattleshirt says, That gets a repeat beat in Dance with Dragons when Mors Umber declares that he'll take Stannis as king if he provides Mance Rayder's skull to him. Interestingly, it is not Mance Rayder who, of course, is burned at the stake in A Dance with Dragons. Who is it? ... It is Rattleshirt. So seemingly Mors Umber joins up with Stannis. So his own skull was provided as a bowl for Mors Umber to take Stannis as king, at least temporarily. And well, not super temporarily because he dies in the Winds of Winter. But yes, that is a great little bit of foreshadowing that we have here that George may have just gone back to a Clash of Kings Reddit and be like, hey, I can have Rattleshirt occupy this role in A Dance with Dragons.
How ironic that the guy who likes wearing bone armor becomes kind of a bone trophy himself. It's a live by the sword, die by the sword in that case, for sure. Mm-hmm. So moving on to our theory/discussion portion of this episode. So as we were saying, one by one, these Night's Watchmen die, of course. Or do they? We hear Squire Dalbridge die. It seems pretty clear that he dies. We hear the horn blow. We don't see his body, but the fact that the wildlings are still chasing the other men seems clear he's dead. Eben, we know for sure, is dead because the wildlings show Jon and Qhorin his beheaded head, and then Qhorin, of course, we see die when Jon kills him. But the one member of this group that we do not see die, we do not see a body for, is Stone Snake. He vanishes off into the Frostfangs on foot in this chapter, and that is the last we hear of him. So what do you think, Jeff? Is Stone Snake ever going to come back to the story, and if so, how?
So it's interesting. The order that Qhorin Halfhand gives Stone Snake is that he's supposed to make for the Fist of the First Men. He does not show up at the Fist of the First Men, or maybe he did at some point. Maybe he shows up to the Fist of the First Men after Mormont and has run his ass off to try and survive there. But he is not there. So he's not present there. He's known as he's completely unaccounted for. And if there's a character that is unaccounted for in the story, you have to bet that he's likely going to come back. So I know that you've written a fair amount about this, but I love the theory. I think that you have written or popularized, one of the two, is that Stone Snake is going to return as a prologue point of view character for the Winds for a Dream of Spring, or potentially as a epilogue character for the Winds of Winter, him being the potential eyes for the Wall coming down. Like he finally makes it back to the Wall. He's fought his entire way back to the North, fought through hundreds of thousands of wildlings and knights and White Walkers, and he's finally here. And all of a sudden, boom, the Wall comes down. I think that would be a devastating moment for the narrative. Again, Stone Snake is a very minor character in the story, but George likes to take these minor characters that get mentioned, characters like Chet, who will be covering for Storm Swords in the prologue, and make them into prologue point of view characters for the story. So I think there's a potential avenue for Stone Snake to return in the story, and I think it's a great way that George could integrate this missing character into the greater narrative. What do you think, sir?
Yeah, I think if George very clearly leaves his hand open to play with Stone Snake, because of course you can say he's a tertiary character. He's not going to have an important role to play. No one's waiting with bated breath for Stone Snake to return and upend the narrative. He's not even as important as Benjen or Rickon or Missing Starks. I don't think they're super important either. But like it's so obvious what George does here. It's so unsubtle. He could so easily have showed us Stone Snake's body. He could, like you say, he could have had Stone Snake turn up at the Fist like he was supposed to right before the White Walkers attack. And then he gets wiped out of the Fist of the First Men in a Storm of Swords. Or he makes it back to the Wall, but he dies in the battle against the Wildlings. Or he makes it back to the Wall and he's still just around hanging with Jon in A Dance with Dragons. You could write it that way. George chooses to do none of these things. And I think he could very easily have done that with no plan for what to do with Stone Snake. Maybe he just thought, I'm going to have other stuff that I want to do up north of the Wall. I'm going to get Bran up here eventually. Maybe it's going to be useful for me to have a character who can help or have some information. So this one guy, I'm going to drop in, he has his climbing skill, so it's remotely plausible he might survive. And then I can bring him around later, if I need to. But so far, George hasn't done that. He didn't do that in A Dance with Dragons, even though Bran went beyond the Wall, even though Jon was sending other rangers beyond the Wall. So yeah, as you say, elevating characters to a prologue or epilogue POV is something George has done, a way of getting a little look on a situation or a setting that we wouldn't get from one of our more permanent POVs, and then usually those one-off POVs get killed off right away at the end of the chapters. He did that, speaking of the Night's Watch, he did that with Chet, north of the Wall, at the beginning of the Storm of Swords. We'd met Chet before. He briefly becomes the prologue POV to show us his mutiny before it gets wiped away. He did it again with Merritt Frey and with Varamir among the Wildlings, with Kevon Lannister to the epilogue to the Dance with Dragons. So there's an established precedent set. And also, as you've talked about before, George has done this so far kind of alternating thing with the prologues, where every other book, the prologue is set north of the wall, and then the other time it's set south of the wall. So books 1, 3, and 5, the prologues were set north of the wall, 2 and 4 south. If it keeps that up, the Winds of Winter prologue is supposed to feature Jane Westerling, so that indicates it might happen in the Riverlands or the Westerlands, so south of the wall. And then our POV, prologue POV for the final book would be back north of the wall. You do have Stone Snake. He is still present in the story. He could easily be your north of the wall POV, in which case, yeah, I think he would be a POV on the rise of the White Walkers or their march over the ruins of the wall, or some such glorious image before, he gets killed by them, as I imagine would probably happen in that. It would be easy for, this is, I think, a dangling thread George can drop without consequence. Stone Snake could never come back up again, and that's fine. We just assume his body is moldering somewhere up there in the Frostfangs. But it is such a clear-cut case, because certain of those things, some things like this, it takes, I think, an eagle eye, so to speak, to spot. But this is like a blatant case of you have not seen this body. So it is interesting to wonder.
Right. If you don't see a body, was there an actual murder that took place? I mean, it's great. I think it's a way that George could play with the narrative going forward. Of course, he could drop him as well, and most fans would probably be like, "Oh, whatever happened to Stone Snake? Whatever happened to Weasel? Remember her from Arya's story in the Clash of Kings?
Exactly.
We never see her again." But I imagine we're going to see Stone Snake at some point in the future, or at least have the revelation about his fate, similar to Benjen Stark, who of course goes missing as well. And George has said that Benjen's fate will be revealed at some point down the road for the Winds of Winter or Dream of Spring. So, yeah, I would like for Stone Snake to come back. He would be cool to come back. I would just hate to have him show up right as the wall comes down. But that's
exactly. Just in time. He's got a cool name, is the thing. His name is Stone Snake. It sounds like it's out of Metal Gear Solid or something. You can't abandon a character with a name like Stone Snake. That's it. Especially compared to a lame name like Chet. Like Chet's a fun character, but his name is just Chet. Ugh, just that one syllable. It's so close to Chad. No, we got Stone Snake. He's awesome. Clint Eastwood plays Stone Snake. Kurt Russell plays Stone Snake. It's just, love that.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, what if its name is actually like Pate and Stone Snake is just like a nickname for him or something like that? Yeah,
that's an excellent point, because there's no way he was named Stone Snake. So you're totally right. He probably named some ordinary ass name like Will or Pate or Chet. And he was like, you know what would sound cool up here in the mountains is Stone Snake. And everyone else in the group was like, okay, Stone Snake. Guess we're calling Joe Stone Snake now. That's probably what happened.
Yeah, Lord Snow, Stone Snake, or like a Slayer, Sam the Slayer, right? That's a mocking nickname.
Exactly.
Yeah. Could be the case as well for Stone Snakes. His backstory yet to be revealed in the Dream of Spring prologue or the Winds of Winter epilogues. We'll see how that pans out. So I think that's going to wrap us up for this analysis on A Clash of Kings, Johnny. As always, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. If you have the chance, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify, anywhere and everywhere where you find our podcasts.
You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/NotaCastASOIAF. You can follow us on Twitter at NotaCastASOIAF, or shoot us an email at NotaCastASOIAF@gmail.com. You can find me at PoorQuentin on Twitter or at PoorQuentin.com.
And you can find me at Brendan Beefish on Twitter, Brendan Beefish on Reddit, and my website is warsandpoliticsspiceandfire.wordpress.com.
We want to shout out and thank our high lords and ladies on Patreon. Red Relu himself, who has renounced his allegiance to the Squishers. Lady of 1,000 Words. Septon Maribald, the Shoeless Sage. Sister Winter, Lady of the Wolfswood. Nessie the Elusive, Warden of the Neck, Defender of the North, and Keeper of Secrets. Sir Thomas the Raven Knight, Lord Blackwood. Sir Way, of course. Matt, Warden of the Sanguine Shore. Lord Sam K. Wisdom Benjicott, Alchemist of Sets and Quanta. Mage of the Arts of Bool and De Morgan. Tibbs the Great of House Catnapping. Lord J. Manderley, Baker of the Frey Pies. Septon, Mariful Head of Hair, Lady Silverwing, Caboth the Unfrozen, Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light, Sir Keith of House Corbray, Wielder of Lady Forlorn, Lord Andrew, Warden of the Dubai Sands, Lord Young of the Ghostwoods, Lady Mira Reed, Wielder of Dark Sister, Slayer of Tinfoil, Sir Will of the Anarcho-Syndicalist Commune, Lord Clay, Sir Small Paul, Guardian of the Stonehaven, Defender of Dunatar Castle, Septon T-Bone, Refined Wrangler of Icy Arachnids, Lady Veronica, who was abandoned the orphans at the Inn of the Crossroads to become the Queen of Memes, Lady Danielle of House Lannister, Titanium Pirate, Lady Joan, Lady Ranger of the Frostfangs, Lady Amy Blackfire, Analyzer of Chinese Literature and Dismantler of the Patriarchy, Sydney of House Quo, Princess of the Friendly Black Hotties and the Summer Isles, Random, Fierce Protector of Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things, Sir, Lady, Jordan, Defender of the God's Eye, and Lord Peter, not Peter, drinker of strong wine and Lord Commander of the Flat Planetos Society. Thank you so much, as always, to all our High Lords and ladies for your support.
Yeah, thank you folks so much for your support every single month. It means a lot to us. So join us next week for a Clash of Kings Brand 7, our final chapter to Clash of Kings. I'm sad. I fucking love a Clash of Kings now. I mean, I loved it before, but I fucking love it now. In which Bran Stark emerges from the crypts of Winterfell to find devastation and hope awaiting him. And we'll be joined by none other than Manu from the podcast Sans Frontiers, which is great. Manu has not been with us since he was one of our first guests. He came on for Game of Thrones Brand 4, which is a great early episode that we did. And we're so pleased to have Manu back for that episode.
Yes, Manu's one of my favorite people online and just in general. We had a great time with him way back in the day for Game of Thrones Brand 4. He's been doing his own great podcast work lately, and he's just always delightful to talk to, so we can't wait to have him on for the final chapter in the Clash of Kings and one of the best chapters in the Clash of Kings. Brand 7 is a true work of art, so we can't wait to bring that to you, all three of us.
We cannot wait for that indeed. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting us, and we'll see you next week for a Clash of Kings Brand 7.
Another short but sweet one.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much for all you folks for coming out. Apparently, there's an NCAA tournament thing tonight that's going on. Am I understanding that correctly?
Oh, we're still doing sports.
Yeah, I mean, sports. The Orioles are undefeated, right?
So I gather. I was just like paying half attention to the Buffalo Sabres, the hockey team, being on a wonderful losing streak, because the most I pay attention to sports at this point is just like enjoying Buffalo teams losing. Which is just the most low energy and easiest of sports tasks.
Well, now the Buffalo Bills are actually good again. So yay, go Buffalo Bills! And actually, the Orioles did lose tonight, so they're 3-1 now, unfortunately. So
cursed them.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said anything, as always, when it comes to my favorite sports teams. How's everybody doing tonight? Everybody good? Everybody get their shots? Getting on the schedule yet? In Maryland, they just for is it in Pennsylvania? Have they done it for like 16 and up yet that you can schedule for your first one? Or
yeah. I mean, we're doing okay in our county, but it's it really varies in Pennsylvania as a state right now, kind of all over the place, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I hope you can get your shot soon, man. I really do.
Yeah, I want to see. We're trying to get some results into what it does for people with fibromyalgia in terms of Chloe.
Yep. So
we got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah. Well,
no, it's all good. It's just a precaution to take. I'm not will prevent this. I just think we just need some information, because ordinary stuff can be an ass kicker with fibromyalgia, and then there's extraordinary stuff can be even more of an ass kicker. So it's just that's just the world. Anywho,
those shots are not fun. I mean, the first one was okay. The second one was like kind of knocked me on my ass.
So I gather
the next day, but
yeah, no thanks.
But yeah, unfortunately, but better to be vaccinated than not vaccinated for sure. Resume some sort of normalcy. What is normalcy even like 13 months later?
Gone. We're broken permanently forever.
Anyways, happier. Happy.
That's my mood. It's bleak. Not really.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I mean, I'm exactly the same level of bleak I've always been. That's the best way of putting it.
But you're like a happy bleak guy.
As long as I cough death. I guess I'm happy within a sad context of sadness, if that makes sense. I'm very happy with my life, and then if I think about anything that's larger than the scope of my life, I'm like, no, back to thinking about the scope of my life and nothing else. So that's the dynamic.
That is that. There's the podcast. So yeah,
pretty much. It's just Tony saying in the chat, protect Chloe at all costs.
Absolutely.
That's pretty much the mood.
We're all sworn to Chloe at this point. We're all like, we all taken our vows to Chloe.
I think it's unfortunately true.
SKNCS, given that even-numbered books have had a Maester affiliate point of view, will George attempt to put a Maester point of view in the Riverlands, or will he break the trend? So I'm assuming he's asking about, in the Winds of Winter, George has said that Jane Westerling will appear. will it be a Maester's point of view, or who will actually be the point of view for the Windswinter prologue? There's been a number of great theories that are out there. The one that I really liked a lot was written by our friend Adam Feldman, which he had said that Sir Ilan Payne could be the point of view for the Windswinter prologue. But unfortunately, as I was going through some stuff from the So Spake Martin archive, George has said, it was asked whether Ilan Payne will ever become a point of view, and George said, Dad, wouldn't bet on it. So that might not necessarily be the case. I'm trying to remember. I wish we had Micah here. Micah's unfortunately working tonight. You could tell us who the Maester is that is with that is with Jamie, and potentially with the band that's going west. So I don't know. I wish it was Ilan Payne. It probably won't be. It's probably going to be Forley Prester or someone else in the party himself. But George could do a whole number of things. Will it be a Maester though? I don't know. Who do you think will be the prologue for the Windswinter?
Forley Prester, I've always thought was a pretty good bet. Ilan Payne would be awesome. I think it might be one of those things that's just awesome in our heads.
Right.
And doesn't necessarily translate. Yeah, I mean, if George wants to keep to that pattern, I don't know how intentional a pattern that was, but if he wants to keep to it, he can invent a Maester if he wants to. Like, that's easy. Right. Maester Scoriam, Maester Salazar from the Cape of Eagles. He was with the phrase the whole time. And now he's our POV. I mean, that. Then you got to kind of make that character interesting. That would be the task on top of that. But George doesn't need to stick to that pattern if he doesn't want it to. Forley Prester is established, and he seems like an intelligent dude, someone who would have interesting military thoughts to kind of access. So that would be fine.
Yeah, I guess it's just like Forley Prester just seems so conventional, and I think George's choices for point of views has been interesting. It always surprises us. Has there ever been like a point of view character where like, I was always expecting Barrier Sixskins to be the point of view? Like, no one thought it was going to be Barrier Sixskins until George is like, it's going to be Barrier Sixskins, because he actually read the Barrier prologue at a convention before he published Dance of Dragons, about 4 years before he published it. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting all the same what happens to the Riverlands with Jane, with the Brother Buck banners, with the party going west, with Jamie still being there's lots of great stuff that George is likely going to unpack there for the Windswinter. So we'll see what happens. Pedro asks, what do you think about the theories of Qhorin being gay or bi or even being Mance's lover? A guy also requests me to ask you, what do you think about the theory that Qhorin and the Blackfish were lovers?
Well, the characters who are queer in A Song of Ice and Fire they still have it dramatically under wraps, and George gives you little clues. So I think characters for whom there's basically no clues, I think it's kind of a reach. I think like the Blackfish, I think there are hints, I think, that he might be gay or asexual. I think with Qhorin, it's pretty clear, like his only love is duty. Like, it's like Ario Hoda, who's, his only love is his ex. His wife is his ex. That's Qhorin Halfhand. I don't think the implication is necessarily that he felt outre sexually. I think it was more just that he just, at some point, just stopped having an interest in it. And then when he brings up this maid, this fire looks like a maid, you get the sense, is this the first time Qhorin's thought about ladies in like decades? Or like allowed himself to at all? So that's more the takeaway I get from it. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that Qhorin works best as like this kind of asexual character. But then again, you do have that mention here of a maid as beautiful as a maid on her wedding night, or as shy as a maid on her wedding night. That's interesting to me. Again, I don't know. I think that Qhorin as a name, right? It kind of reminds me. Is he like, people have like theorized, like, is he like from Dorne, because you have a number of those Q kind of names coming out of Dorne? That would probably preclude him from
Islands.
Or the Iron Islands. Yeah, but that would probably preclude him from being involved with Brynden Tully in any way, just given the location. Although yes, the Iron Islands are relatively close to the Riverlands, and Brynden Tully was a part of, I think he was a part of the Greyjoy Rebellion at some point, repelling that, I guess. Gosh.
But Qhorin was already on the the wall at that point. So
probably, yeah, because he had been there for
that was
20
like
years,
9 years ago. Yeah,
yeah.
So I mean, yeah, and the Qhorin Mance thing is like I think this is a situation where I think it is understandable to unlock queer subtext in strong male relationships, because so often that subtext is there and is denied by people who don't want to think about their favorite male characters as gay. But I think in that well-intentioned process, it's easy to overlook, you know, straight male friendships as like an important emotional thing and as a part of drama in story. And those bonds often have a homoerotic quality to it, whether that's intentional by the author or not. But that doesn't necessarily always mean they're secretly gay. And so I don't think Qhorin and Mance were lovers, and I think Mance clearly has it for the ladies. I think Qhorin and Mance developed a bond so intense that the way Qhorin talks about him, it's as though he's a departed lover.
Yeah.
So that's what I think.
I mean, that seems very reasonable, and I think also correct. And I think, yeah, I mean, like you could develop like this a sense of intimacy with someone in a relationship and a friendship, without it being sexual, but of course it having the potential overtones of homoeroticism, as you were talking about. But yeah, I think Mance seems to be straight from all we've seen so far. So I think it probably precludes that. But they were close enough that they could have been married, right? I mean, they basically had
exactly.
You know, marriage is. I mean, being married for almost 8 years at this point, 7 years, right? 7 years. There we go. Almost married for 7 years. You know, the sexuality part of it is a piece of it, obviously, but it's more about the bond that you share with the intimacy that you build with your partner, the relationship that you experience and you develop over the long haul, and you go through the shared hardships of various things and the joys too. So that seems to be like Manson and Qhorin Halfhand. You know, except for the sex. That's all. The only thing they lacked in their marriage is the fact that they were sexually, physically intimate with each other.
Like many a long-term marriage, ayo.
Sure.
But yeah,
hey!
like a couple people have brought this up in the chat. Like, I think if George was a younger man or was writing this series later, I think A Song of Ice and Fire might be significantly gayer than it is. You know, because but it's on the verge of like George like already going, oh, isn't it interesting that Renly, the perfect athletic king, isn't it interesting that he's gay? Aren't I progressive in 1998 for coming up with this? And yeah,
and he was, yeah,
right. So, but the problem is the series is still happening decades later. So I think that's not a criticism. That's just you know, George R. R. Martin is not necessarily at the forefront of such things, and we shouldn't expect him to be.
Yeah, I mean, he's progressive for being a 73-year-old man living in the United States of America. You know, at this time. So.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, all right. Tony asked. Excuse me. One more question. There's one other question I want to go. Oh, well, I just lost Tony's question. Damn.
Ask it again, Tony, if it's past the pop-up. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Lefernick asked, Jeff, did any of the favorite story arc poll results the other day surprise you? So I've been doing just a series of polls just because I've been interested because when I sometimes, as I do, look at like our statistics for like what people are listening to, I find like it really interesting that there's like a ton of people that listen to our Davos episodes and our Catelyn episodes, and there are fewer people that listen to our Sansa episodes. And I was curious whether there's a particular thing about their arcs from book to book that was more appealing to different sets of fans, the fans that I would imagine listen to us. The one that really surprised me, and I think it surprised you as well, was how many people. So I'm looking at the results right now. 50.5% of people thought that Davos Seaworth's A Dance with Dragons storyline is the best in the series, when it's obvious to me that A Storm of Swords is the much better book storyline for Davos Seaworth. Dance is great and has those epic lines. I think that's what people tend to gravitate towards.
And I get that. I love that stuff too. But yeah, in terms of construction, Davos' storyline in Storm is like, you know, it's like looking at Michelangelo or looking at a perfect sculpture. It's just like every beat in Davos' Storm chapters is just like perfect. And he goes from having nothing to having everything and giving it all up. And it's just like, every dialogue scene is perfect. And yeah, like, the chapters in Dance are great and really a great integration of Davos into the North. But yeah, the Storm chapters, I can't wait to do those with you, sir, because those are truly, truly special.
How many parts do we say we're going to do Davos 4 in? Is it like, are we saying 4 or 5?
4, and Davos 5, which Atwell just did.
Yeah.
Those are huge chapters, which just multiple dialogue scenes that run on forever.
And
because George clearly likes writing Team Stannis a lot.
they're so dense. There's so much going on in each frame. Like these Davos scenes are just outstanding. I mean, even like Davos 1 involves like a supernatural crisis of Davos coming to his faith, so to speak. But then he kind of abandons that. It's probably one of the weakest. It's like the most well-written stuff where Davos is thinking he's talking with the mother on that little island he's in. And it's like, wow, Davos, you're actually like discovering things about yourself and about the faith of the Seven. And then George kind of drops that storyline going forward, which is one of the few drop balls we get from Davos's The Storm of Swords story.
That's true. The faith is mostly just there to get him on this path to kill Melisandre, and that immediately gets taken away from him, which is great, because then that puts him on the path towards saving lives as Davos's proper role, rather than taking them.
I think the other one that was a little bit, people have said that they preferred Sansa's A Feast for Crows storyline as the best one, and I kind of go back and forth, because Sansa has maybe I'll come up with a different opinion when we get to this in A Storm of Swords, but there's some weak early Sansa chapters in A Storm of Swords, and that kind of goes for all of the King's Landing point of views, Tyrion and Sansa primarily in A Storm of Swords. Maybe I'll come up with a different opinion when we get to Sansa too, but I always thought that her later A Storm of Swords material was really strong and intensely good, and the reveals about who killed Jon Arryn being one of just the major, like, whoa, holy shit moments in A Song of Ice and Fire. But people like her Feast for Crows storyline, which is fine, I guess. I don't know. I
think part of this is, in part due to our own tireless efforts, people are looking kinder on Feast and Dance these days than they used to. So I think people are just kind of getting into that more. And I think Sansa, while people love a lot of her individual chapters, I think there is still frustration with her King's Landing stuff because of how slow it moves and how limited it is geographically. Whereas her Veil chapters in Feast, they're a little more hands-on, and there's a little more clear change happening because it's just a smaller scale. So, there's no like Battle of Blackwater in A Feast for Crows for Sansa. There's no one as attention grabbing as Olenna, but it is like she's getting a clear education at Littlefinger's hands, and she's learning things. So for people who get bogged down in Sansa's earlier chapters, I can see why Feast feels like a little more, ironically, because Feast is often has the reputation of being like the nothing happens book. And for Sansa, actually, Feast is when things start to cook a little bit.
Yeah, she starts to develop an identity and starts to do things. So yeah, I think there's probably be a few more polls over the next couple of days. We'll see what happens with those. So if you're interested, I'm doing that on my Twitter page. And obviously, I think too, if you're not voted as well for the Song of Madness, their final is going on right now between Eddard Stark and Brienne of Tarth. And so far, Brienne is leading at the moment. So we'll see how that shakes out going forward. All right. Maxwell asked, what do you guys? That's like a separate thing. Think about the future of the Lannisters. I know they seem doomed, but do you think George extends the twins' story to A Dream of Spring, or does he complete their story in The Winds of Winter? We actually had a really interesting discussion about the Lannisters on the Not a Slack. I think we were a few days ago. I think you weren't sure if they were going to last past The Winds of Winter besides Tyrion.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, I think they're going to make it past The Winds of Winter, but you say why they're going to die out in the Winds of Winter.
I see why Cersei is really pleasing as a villain to keep around, and I see how tied she is to Jaime, and I see why they built up to her in the show. I'm just not sure what role there is for Cersei actively doing things now that young Grift is around, because that whole storyline has to pay off, and the Dornish are now joining him. So like what, young Grift is going to get almost to King's Landing, and then Dany destroys him, and then also like I get that that's the Stannis Renly arc again. I don't think it's going to be that note for note.
No.
So I feel like Cersei has to have some kind of downfall of power before all that long, and then I think she has to die. So yeah, I'm conflicted as to how long it takes for Jaime and Cersei, because I like the more elaborate theories of her fleeing back to Casterly Rock and confrontations happening there last season 7 of the show. I just don't know how much room there is really for that geographically or within the space of the narrative. So Tyrion, I think, goes all the way to the end. I think that was clear, I think, even before season 8. But Cersei and Jaime, I'm really conflicted on how long their stories go in the books.
I think for Jaime at least, he has that vision of him fighting the White Walkers, right? He has the werewood stump vision where he's laying there and he's fighting with a flaming sword in his hand. If you remember that from, was that
Sure,
Storm
yeah,
or was
he's
it
in the
a
dark.
Feast for Crows? So yeah, he's in the dark. So I want to believe that Jaime is going to go north and fight the White Walkers and fight the others similar to how he did in Game of Thrones. The question for Cersei is more interesting to me because I feel like the show didn't have young Grift, and they needed a villain for Dany to fight in the series.
Sure.
So how much of young Grift's storyline was kind of folded into Cersei's? How much of young Grift's book storyline was folded into Cersei's show storyline is an open question, in my opinion. I think we'll have to wait to see more of how the Winds of Winter and the Energy of Spring will unfold, or the Winds of Winter in the event that she dies in that book. I tend to think that she survives, but I do wonder whether she might drop as a point of view character at some point, because I think like George wasn't originally planning for her to be a point of view character. Really, when he was writing all through the books, he did not plan for her being a point of view character until after he abandoned the 5-year gap. And then he realized that probably at some level that he couldn't just do the King's Landing storyline from Jaime's chapters in A Feast for Crows, that he had to have Cersei there to cover all the stuff that happens at King's Landing. So I could see a scenario where she survives, somehow she flees King's Landing, maybe Qyburn gets her out or something like that. Young Grift takes the throne, then she's out in the Westerlands. It's kind of like the Queen of the West, or that's like the kind of the Rhaena Targaryen type of character. But I could see her also dying as well. But I also want to see Jaime go up to Winterfell. And I have to imagine these are things that George is wrestling with as a writer, of how to kind of manage these different interlocking point of view characters and their storylines, and when to end their storylines, when they drop his point of view characters, when they pick up again, and different stuff like that. I mean, we'll see how the Winds of Winter looks when at some point it's published. And I will be very curious about the Lannister storyline in particular, because that does seem, as we both have been sort of hinting at, it seems like kind of a dark spot in terms of like not really being sure what George has in mind for them going forward. Michael asks, this is a really good question. You guys have been writing in the fandom for years. You both changed over the years. How do you stay interested in A Song of Ice and Fire and find new and interesting ways to engage with the story?
That's a great question. Taking in other stories, honestly, is the key. I watch a bunch of movies. I'm always reading a couple other different things at the same time. I'm rereading Nabokov's Ada or Ardor, and going slowly through the Hilary Mantel, Thomas Cromwell books. I also just got, I think it's somewhere around here, I got a copy I've never read of Silence, the book about Jesuit missionaries in Japan in the 1600s that got made into the Scorsese movie with Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver.
That's great movie. Amazing. Have you seen the movie? That's a fantastic
I love that movie. That would be a good episode sometime.
Oh my gosh, yeah. We have so many on the list, right?
We have so many on the list, I know, but if you've never seen Silence, as you know, all Scorsese movies are great, but that movie is incredible. I've never read the novel it's based on, so I'm never doing that. But yeah, it's you keep yourself refreshed with other characters and other worlds, other myths and patterns and exciting moments and weird little phrases. And then A Song of Ice and Fire feels fresh because it is dense enough to support coming back, and it is emotional enough to make you feel things. I think you just have to not burn out on it. And that's easy to do when you spend enough time talking about it as we do. And you know, it can be, you know, you got other things you want to do in your life, obviously, besides read another book or read another story. But I think that is the key for sure.
The key for me is you. And it's spending every single week talking with you and watching these documents fill up with really great insights. And, you know, it sounds trite to say it, but, you know, I look at what I was writing about back in like 2013 and 2014, and like how excited I was about what Stannis was going to be doing in the Winds of Winter, and then what, you know, Team Aegon was going to be doing in the Winds of Winter, and what Dany was going to be doing, and all these things. And I don't think I could really approach that material with like the same amount of fervor that I feel right now about these things. Part of it is that like I've already read, it's already been written and done with, and I tend to kind of gravitate towards what I'm, you know, excited to do. But what I'm doing, like in the current, what's currently occupying my headspace. But what's currently occupying my headspace is spending every week, you know, chatting with you about A Song of Ice and Fire, and writing about A Song of Ice and Fire and doing that for this podcast, and of course chatting with all of you folks who have stuck around in the comments. And thank you again for doing that. You make it feel fresh to us, and ask questions and explore the narrative in new and interesting ways. And I sometimes I do kind of feel a little bit burned out by it, because I'm like, I kind of feel that's some point you're just kind of like scraping the bottom of the barrel of like ideas that I had like years and years ago to write something or make something fresh or new. And if you have that fire burning to do long essays and stuff like that, that's great. For me, like, my fire is primarily for you. You are my fire that keeps me burning. You are the fire that burns against the realms of what am I looking for? What's the word I'm looking for?
The darkness or the sleeping or whatever it is, Jeff.
The darkness or the sleeping or the mediocrity. There we go. That's what I'm looking at.
Thank you for saying that. That makes me feel real good. No, I totally agree. Of course, it's because it's not. Yeah, the text is the text. It's the people that make it special, and getting to have such far-flung connections. And I agree. That's what keeps me excited. Is not even reading the chapter, but reading and hearing what you have to say about the chapter gets me excited for each one and for the next one as well. That's it.
I love it. All right. Hi Frank asks, what's the mechanism for the other's ultimate defeat? Copious Dragonfire at the heart of winter. Stannis, of course. Fucking Stannis is going to get brought up in this comment. Stannis's prodigious military genius. The peace treaty, astral brand going, Thanos/Saiyan. Saiyan,
I think.
Saiyan.
Yeah, that's a good, well-phrased question from Frank. I don't think it's going to be similar to the show, in that I don't think there is the same exact central, like, bipedal singular Night King figure with the others, or if there is, there's just has not been revealed or even hinted at. And I don't think that Arya's arc is going to quite bend in that direction. I think Arya's confrontation with the return to dead is Stoneheart, is her mom. I think a character, of course, who does not exist in the show. And so I think there has to be some other mechanism. I do kind of like the idea in the show that Dragonfire won't be the trick.
Yes.
I think that's interesting, especially it ties into if Dany's arc functions like Stannis's, where the desire to go north with fire and save the day ends up revealing something desperate or something that's broken or not working. So I do think that in the show, it probably will, in the books, it probably will come down to a large degree to Bran, I think, especially if Bran is supposed to be, plausible as the king of Westeros afterwards. Might help if he's the one who saves the day. Right. And he is also the one getting trained in magic and also in White Walker territory, and he can just function on the Weirwood net itself. So I think I think whatever killing blow needs to be struck, or whatever makes it more than just a brave feudal last stand at Winterfell, I think Bran is the one who makes the difference. But I think also, like in season 8, I think it will be emphasized on a lot of different people, including minor characters having significant roles to play. Agreed.
And I do think there will be some sort of military confrontation with the others. You don't have Dany coming with dragons and Unsullied and Dothraki and all these people just to not be used. It seems like that's building towards a greater angle than it simply being them fighting against Aegon. So I agree entirely with the idea that Bran's going to play the pivotal role in defeating the others. And I think I don't want to spoil too much of our Patreon episode, but one of our last episode on the Forsaken, we talked about Bran's potential role in the astral plane and what it might mean if the others are defeated in some sort of conventional / Dragonfire sense. But then the others might come back in the form of someone else, and Bran has to defeat them yet again on the astral plane. So if you're not one of our patrons, consider joining our Patreon to listen to that last Forsaken episode, because it is Emmett's theory is really awesome, and it's just kind of blew my limited hair back. So, but yeah, if you are a patron, you know what we're talking about. Yeah. So it's all sorts of interesting ways, and I think like this is one of the things I think that George struggles with a little bit in writing the others, because he's so much of the story has been thrown at the conventional political military side of conquering the city of Meereen, fighting the War of the Five Kings, and the background, almost in the background, but not totally in the background, there's been the supernatural threat of the others, and how everyone starts to focus on that and defeat that at the end of the series is going to be an interesting thing to witness, but I imagine it has to be really hard for George to write.
Yeah, totally agreed.
All right. Alan asks, who do you think will be the point of view characters fighting in the war against the others? Bran?
Well, Bran will definitely be there. I think Jon will be there.
Dany?
Dany, certainly towards the end. Sansa will probably be around. I don't think she'll be on the front lines, but I think she'll be heavily involved in the politics. Melisandre will be there. I don't know how many POV chapters she's going to have after Stannis burns Shireen, which I think probably happens right before the war with the others starts or right at the beginning of it. And then there's Davos, and I'm not sure. You've obviously had great theories about Davos going back to the south at some point, so I'm not sure if Davos really... I don't know if Davos is really involved directly in the war with the others at all. Maybe I've always thought something creepy is going to happen on Skagos to make Davos leave. Like zombies walk out of the water or something. So maybe Davos has
from
involved
Hardhome,
with that stuff. Yeah, exactly.
That
but I don't think...
water.
Yes, exactly. That parallel. So yeah, I would say that sounds about right. Yeah, I think Jon, Bran, Sansa eventually, Dany eventually. That sounds about right to me.
Maybe Jaime, Brienne.
Maybe Jaime and Brienne eventually. I could see that.
I mean, it's...
I'm not sure. That's the thing. I don't think the war against, I understand why people weren't happy with only one episode on the show, but I don't think the war against the others is going to be a very long, protracted thing. Because I don't, there's not that much strategy you can really have when it's like, right. It's winter and there's an army of zombies. It's either we blow them up or we don't. So yeah, I don't. I think there will be a handful of POVs who have some very interesting ideas to try, and some important things will happen. But I don't think it's going to be like, World War II, but against the others. I don't think it's going to be that extensive. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you in that. The important. I mean, I'm trying to remember, because it's been a while since I've read Return of the King, but I do remember, the aftermath. Well, obviously, the Scouring of the Shire being the more important, pivotal narrative moment in Return of the King. But I don't remember the actual Siege of Gondor taking up a ton of page space, but I could be totally wrong about that because I'm going on a 15-year memory at this point.
It takes up a couple chapters. Even if you go back to Tolkien as the OG, Helm's Deep is not a huge thing in the books of Lord of the Rings. Helm's Deep is part of one chapter. Right. And there's way more time spent on the build-up to and aftermath of Helm's Deep. I don't think that's Tolkien making a stance about what's important. I think that's just kind of how he writes. Yeah. But I think with George, I think sometimes he does kind of pulling that kind of subversion on you. So I've started to get more into the idea that the others are going to be defeated, not at the very end of the story, but that there will be some significant action afterwards.
Yeah, I do agree with that. So we'll see what happens. Avi asks, given everything that needs to happen with the others and Bran's training, do you see him having the most wins chapters? If not, who do you see having the most in the book?
That's a good question. What do you think, sir?
I think Bran's going to have 4, 5 chapters tops. I mean, honestly, George has such a hard time writing Bran's chapters. We know that one was left over from Dance that was likely cut to the Winds of Winter. We don't know anything about that chapter besides that it was mentioned in a list of chapters that George was planning on writing for Dance with Dragons, but didn't end up in the final published version of Dance with Dragons. So I think he's probably going to not have very many chapters at all. I think we're probably going to have Bran being trained by Bloodraven, probably something about the reveal of the fate of Jojen in that chapter. Probably going to have the attack on Bloodraven's cave and hold the door. As George has said, that's going to be revealed in the Winds of Winter, but in a different context than what we saw in the show. Bran leaving and fleeing south with Mira Reed and Summer, and showing up at Winterfell at the end of the story when all the Starks are reunited there at Winterfell. It seems like a kind of the trajectory for Bran's story, but again, I don't know. I think who will have the most chapters in the Winds of Winter is probably going to be someone like Dany, Jon, sure. Tyrion. Yeah, I mean,
Dany and Tyrion would be my bet. Tyrion already has 2, in the sample chapters, and Dany has so much to accomplish. It'll help when they're kind of in the same area, of course. But yeah, I agree. Bran is an interesting case because, as Avi says, there is a ton that needs to happen with him. but it's not a ton you need to show directly. Like by the time we check back in with Bran, he can already have learned a ton if George wants him to.
Right.
Like by the time I get to Bran won the Winds of Winter, he could know everything that George wants him to know. I don't think it's going to be quite that, but I think he's going to know most of it. I think, we're going to see the revelation about Jojen Paste. I think we are probably going to see some extended version of the White Walker backstory that we saw glimpses of in season 6. I think we'll get a couple of sad conversations with Bloodraven, and then I think he's out and maybe makes it back to Winterfell. Maybe that's for the last book. But I would bet Hold the Door is the climax, or maybe even the very end of Bran's story in TWOW. And I don't think he gets that many chapters because he doesn't have very far to go geographically. The characters who have far to go geographically, I think, are going to be the ones who get a shit ton of chapters. Danny has to cross a continent in the Winds of Winter and talk to everybody along the way. So that's a lot of chapters.
I think too, there's a strong possibility, and this is something we start to see in Feast and Dance, is that Bran is showing up in other people's point of view chapters in those chapters. So George might not have to do a lot of Bran's chapters proper because he can put his perspective in Theon, Jon, Sansa, Arya,
everybody. Everybody gets a Bran cameo. Even Sam, like they got ravens down in Old Town, and Bran met Sam. So even he could suddenly the ravens are all going Sam. That's a very good point. He's already started doing that. That's such an easy way to seed Bran in, and make him feel properly like the protagonist if he's showing up in everyone else's storyline. Maybe that'll help sell the whole Bran was the protagonist all along thing that no one likes. Is if Bran is like bleeding into everyone else's storyline. Maybe that'll make him feel more important to people. Yeah,
I think he will. He has to take on a greater prominent role in the Winds of Winter to make his rise as king, sitting the Iron Throne believable at the end of the story. So that's what I imagine, even if they don't have many Bran chapters there. Michael asks, so in Game of Thrones, R plus L equals J sort of fizzles out and plays no role in the endgame. Is that what George will do? Will it be about Jon rejecting his father Rhaegar's obsession with prophecy?
What do you think, sir?
And there's another question from I'll fold this question in. Sweet Melissa asks, will Jon learn of his true parentage in the Winds of Winter? George has said that Jon will learn about his parents in either the Winds of Winter or Dream of Spring, but I think it's likely going to happen in the Winds of Winter. Be interesting to find out if Jon experiences any of that in his second life and in the form of Ghost. Learn some of that from someone who's able to impact that. So Jon, R plus L equals J, is like the cornerstone of A Song of Ice and Fire in terms of like Jon's parentage. It's a big part of Ned's storyline in Game of Thrones. It's a big part of why Jon feels so alienated from everyone that he encounters at Winterfell, because he believes himself to be a bastard born of Ned Stark, but doesn't know who his mother is, and that's a pivotal role for him. I think the show kind of erred a bit in not showing the impacts of that revelation to Jon, because Jon was mopey before he learned about the revelation, and he remained mopey after he learned about his father being Rhaegar Targaryen and his mother being Lyanna Stark. I think it will be important for Jon, and it's going to be important because we're actually going to get Jon's thoughts about it. The show couldn't portray how Jon was feeling about this revelation. He just had to express it in dialogue to Dany primarily, and that being kind of a who's the true king after in Westeros, is it Jon or is it Dany, that becomes the kind of thing that which they tried to center the narrative in the later episodes in season 8 but it didn't really impact a whole lot. The other thing I think is important too about Jon is when he comes back is the type of character he's going to come back. Our friend Michael wrote a really great essay called The Return of the White Wolf, in which he talked about how Jon's personality is going to be likely different from the one we knew from earlier books, because he's going to be bonded with his wolf, with Ghost, and also having been returned by fire, but probably through Melisandre's resurrection. So how will that impact Jon's mentality and his acceptance of Arpacelico's J? I think he's gonna be pretty fucking angry about it, and he might be a bit more politically ambitious than he was portrayed in the show, because he might be a little bit more wolfish, and he might be a little bit less human. It might be more of like a fire white, as George said it a few years ago. So I think it will have a lot to do with Jon's character. I'm not sure about the obsession with prophecy. I think of all things, it might enhance Jon's belief in prophecy in the same way that Stannis being told that he's a special, he's Azor Ahai Reborn, really kind of amped his interest in prophecy. So anyways, I've talked a lot. What do you think, sir?
I think one thing that didn't really work for me about season 8 was the idea that Dany really had something to fear from Jon's claim, because she didn't, because Jon had no interest in ruling, and right. Jon's not a child. Like, no one can make him do it. Like, if Varys says, Jon, you should be king, and Jon says no, that's it. Varys has no hold over Jon. He has no hostages. He has nothing Jon wants, because Jon Snow, as he exists in season 8, doesn't really want anything. And I'm fine with that as Jon, the character, being thrust into situations he doesn't want and has no control over. Like, that still works for me. But the problem there is, like, Dany's fear starts to feel groundless, which again, get back to the young Grift problem. It also doesn't make sense that Dany would fear being rejected on behalf of Cersei, because no one likes Cersei. The people aren't choosing Cersei. They're her hostages. And that's much different from the people choosing young Grift over Dany and potentially choosing Jon over Dany. So I think Jon does have to be a little more ambitious or a little more ruthless or just a little more politically minded for that threat to really make any sense. And that is ultimately, I could see that ultimately, though, being the purpose of R + L = J is to cause a rift between Jon and Dany, because Jon's whole thing and Dany's whole thing is finding someone who understands them and finding a place that they can be at home. So if there's this great ironic twist where the fact that they really are the same family is what drives them apart, that could be great if handled really well. Like, oh, this is what could bring us together, but actually it makes us rivals. Like that interweaving of political and personal, it was rushed in the show, and I think ran aground on the limited character arcs they'd set up for themselves. As a core concept, I think it's terrific, and I don't think it has to. I think it could pay off in terms of a wider reckoning with prophecy, but it doesn't really have to, because that stuff can just exist in the corners, in the peripheries for the audience to pick up on. I think for Jon, it has to be the question of what kind of life he wants to live now and what kind of family he wants to have, and whether this revelation is going to hurt or help him do that. And I think that'll make it not seem like it's fizzling out, even though I don't think Jon is ever going to be king of Westeros or even really try that hard.
I think it'd be interesting to get back to Melicia's question, is this idea that Jon will already know that he's Rhaegar's son when he meets with Dany, because in the show they made it so that he found out after he got into a relationship with Dany. I wonder if that's going to have a larger impact on their rift, and that Jon plays is that he's not actually a Targaryen. He says that he's Ned Stark's son, but when he actually knows that he's Rhaegar Targaryen's son, he has the better claim to the Iron Throne. I can see that playing a larger role in them splitting apart. And of course, Jon assassinating Dany at some point in there, which I think is likely going to happen in A Dream of Spring as well. So, yeah, I mean, R + L = J is important, and like I said, it's the centerpiece, I think, or the foundation for the central mystery of A Song of Ice and Fire, if you want to call it a mystery. But I think it has to have character implications for Jon and for many other characters which go outside of it. Those ripple effects have to be important, and I believe that George will write a bit better than what was portrayed in the show. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and we'll probably call it a night here.
Works for me, sir.
Thank you again for everyone for sticking around for tonight. It's been a lot of fun doing this. Yeah, like I said, like it's fun doing this every single week with you all. So I appreciate you all sticking around, asking questions, and making it fun to be engaged in this fandom. SKNC asks, what do you think is the likelihood of a book 8?
It would probably be a good idea at this point.
Right. Yeah.
It's so abstract that it's very difficult to say, because like we're literally talking about like book binding here at a certain extent, you know. I get why he wants to do it in 7, but he originally thought he was going to do it in 3 and then 4 and then 6. There's no magic number. If his problem really is how can I fit this much material into a book, which was the problem with the previous one, maybe bite the bullet. But that will result in much messier books too. So I know he doesn't, because I don't think he was satisfied with how Dance with Dragons turned out, and I really think he wants to avoid that again.
And he wasn't satisfied with the Feast for Crows either, how that turned out. Like this was a solution that's I believe it was Daniel Abraham presented to him, was to split the books by geographical point of views. A Feast for Crows taking place in the South and in Bravos, and the Dance of Dragons taking place in Marine and the North primarily, with of course a couple King's Landing and Bravos chapters sprinkled in towards the end. So yeah, you could tell like that George was not satisfied with the fact that Dance of Dragons came out the way it did, and his original idea of splitting it by geography, by the fact that he started bringing point of view characters back into A Dance with Dragons that were from the first of the two split books. So to me, I think book 8 makes 8 books makes a lot of sense. At the same time, George has repeatedly recently said that he's still going to do it in 7. He's still planning on 7, and maybe he can get away with that by saying it's just different volumes of the same book, right? So you say, I did 7 books, but
sure.
The Winds of Winter volume 1, 2, and 3, the Dream of Spring volume 1 through 7 or something like that. But again, like, it would be a messy book for George, and I think I really freaking hope he doesn't do this split it by geography. But
sure, he'll lose people. That's the thing. It's like at some point, it's the interests of a coherent story are at odds with the interests of an individual coherent book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think at some point he might have to choose between those two, which is a really, really uncomfortable choice, and I don't envy him that. As you say, if he splits it up again, he will lose a lot of people.
I mean, he lost a lot of people with Feast and Dance. I mean, that's still, yeah. So, if in the next couple of months, if you hear George saying something like, I'm thinking about hard choices for the Winds of Winter, you could be like, oh God, here we go again. Like, oh shit, here we go again. So we'll see. Hopefully not 8 books, but I wouldn't put past him at this point. All right, our final question tonight goes to the Happy Masquerader, who asks, do you think the ultimate climax will be political in nature like in the show? George talks about the scouring of the Shire, but to me that already happened with Winterfell in A Clash of Kings.
I mean, that's true. The mood of the scouring of the Shire kind of does happen with Winterfell. Like, home has been destroyed, but the idea of home is still with you, et cetera, et cetera. The overall overarching narrative function of you've defeated the big bad, but like life is still shitty. you didn't just turn reality into a magic fairy tale princess by beating the Dark Lord. I think that core concept George has talked about his attraction to that, and I could see that coming back at the end. I think gosh, I don't even know if I at that point of just like more just like personal or just like non-mythical, I guess. It just stops being grounded. I don't know what scale it will be on, but I think something like that will happen in ASOF.
Yeah, I think the political will be. I think the White Walkers will be defeated, and then we'll return back to politics as normal. I think we talked about this several months ago at this point, but I had this idea in my mind of the end of World War II, right? Which you have the Soviets, the Americans, the British, and the various Allied powers who had all defeated the great evil, the great Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. And what did they immediately do after they won the Great War, the one war that George said he would have fought in? They all started scheming against each other and preparing for the next conflict. And we have the Cold War, which unfolds for the next almost 50 years after that moment. So I imagine that's going to be something we're going to see political on the political side, that there will be a political ending to A Song of Ice and Fire. But I think it's also going to be embedded in characters, like you were saying, because I imagine the last chapter is going to be from Bran Stark's point of view, in which he might see the past, the present, the future as the reborn three-eyed crow / King of Westeros, and kind of get a glimpse of the different futures of different people, whether they're happy or sad, whether they have happy endings or sad endings or bad endings or tragic endings. I think it's all going to be woven through character. And I think character has been George's strong point in writing A Song of Ice and Fire. And even like when you think about the political stuff in ASOF, it's all grounded in the political. I think of things like Catelyn watching Robb be acclaimed as King of the North. That was all grounded in Catelyn's desperate desire to keep her son safe from harm and have him take up his wooden sword again and to put aside the steel swords that everyone was bearing. That's fascinating to me, that George writes the perspective of Robb being crowned King of the North from his mom, from a mother who is worried about her son. And I think when we're going to get at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire, something similar, that we will see political and magical unfoldings in the plot line, but it will all be interwoven through story.
I totally agree. I couldn't have put it better. I can just envision it as you said it. That was great.
Yes, indeed. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We appreciate all of your excellent questions and loving all of your comments and different conversations y'all were having during the podcast itself. So you all are the best. We appreciate doing this. And again, next week we'll be back for our final chapter in A Clash of Kings for Brand 7. And yeah, and then thereafter we'll I don't know.
We'll see you with Manu next week, folks. Absolutely. Clash of Kings Brand 7. Thanks again for coming out for John.
See you.